From a circuit power outage to a bus and even glass on track, let's just say we had a very strange 2025 testing period. And in this episode of F1 Fridays, I'm going to be discussing what we learned in F1 testing. Now, before we get into the actual nitty-gritty of it, I just want to discuss some of the very strange things that happened. We did have a few red flags throughout those 3 days. However, it was not due to the actual drivers or crashes. It was actually due to some very strange things. We had a period where there was a power outage on the actual circuit. Everyone had to wait for that to be dealt with. I don't know if generators kicked in or they just got the issue sorted, but they had to pause running for a while. We also had rain in Bahrain, which isn't very common. Just throwing that out there. Not much they could do. I think only one team carried like a set of wet tires or intermediates. So most of the teams just sat out that little period of time when the rain was falling. We also had broken glass that fell on the start-finish line. So basically, where you wave the flag, the checkered flag, and the flag to start the race, a pane of glass on that booth fell off into the track, broke. It is what it is. It's one of those rare random things. Thank goodness it happened in testing. They were able to clean it up pretty quickly. But one of the more serious things was that there was a bus on track. No one really knows exactly what was going on. There were cars fully live in their practice sessions, going over 200 miles an hour, so very unsafe. We had incidents in the past in F1 and they vowed never to have things like this happen again. Thank goodness it was testing, but it's still not right. And it was actually the corner that Logan Sargent went off last year. So very, very sketchy. The FIA did say they were going to start an investigation into it, and let's hope that it never happens again. One more kind of weird thing, Haas did have their engine cover blow off and break off a car, which I would say was the only real reliability issue. It's not reliability, it's just, I think something didn't hook right. It is what it is. Didn't really cause any issues, but in terms of strange occurrences, I would say this was the way it is tested. Now, let's get into the actual meat of the discussion. I want to say let's take the testing times with a pinch of salt. Now, all these teams have their own run plans. All of these teams go into testing with specific things they want to try, specific runs and outcomes they want to see. Some teams focus on their actual body work and aerodynamics testing. Some teams focus on actual race runs, some on qualifying. It depends on really the characteristics of the team and the car going into the season, what they do. So you might actually see one of these slower cars on these timing sheets be the quickest when we go to the first race in Melbourne, right? So take it with a pinch of salt. As I said, the timing sheets don't really matter, but there are a few important things in there that we want to obviously point out, which leads us into understanding where these cars are for the season upcoming. Now, day one we had Lando Norris end on top with George Russell and then Max Verstappen. Day two we had Sainz on top with Hamilton and Leclerc coming right after. And in day three we had George Russell, Max Verstappen and Alex Albon. Now, some of the easy takeaways I would want to say based on these timing sheets is that Williams is quick. It seems that they would be one of the midfield teams to be vying for some points continuously. We'll get more in depth later with that. It also shows that Haas doesn't really have too much pace because they seem to be close to the bottom quite often. But again, take it with a pinch of salt. Who really knows? We actually look at this graphic, which I think is going to be more important in analysis, where we have from the F1 actual published website simulation pace for both qualifying and race. So we'll start with qualifying. McLaren seems to be the ones to beat on almost all aspects. Ferrari 0.2 off, which is actually a lot slower than I expected. Then we have Red Bull in third, Mercedes. So if you look at the gap in terms of qualifying, you could kind of see there's a big drop off from the start. If we move on to the race simulation, you'll see McLaren is still on top, but then Ferrari has a closer gap, Red Bull, and then Mercedes is very close to that. There's a big separation between the top four, and then we move to Williams on Racing Bulls on the race simulation. What all this graph and analysis means is that in terms of actual qualifying pace, I am surprised a little bit that Ferrari is so far behind McLaren. When we go into the actual race, we will see how qualifying pans out. Also keep in mind, Bahrain has some special characteristics that tends to benefit other cars versus, the Ferraris, or I even think the Red Bull. Mercedes tends to do pretty well there, and they also had very cool temperatures, which isn't often, and they showed up like how they did in Vegas. So I want to just say it looks like Aston is going to be in for a struggle. Their race pace simulation is so far off even kick Sauber is scary. We do expect them to have a rough season. Now, this next piece of information is basically the time that each team spent on track. This is the time that they spent with their tires getting hot, making laps, and putting in work. Obviously, work is done in the paddock and behind closed doors as well, but as we could see, Mercedes had a total of 458 laps, and in last place we had a Red Bull with 304 laps. So that's over 100 lap difference in testing in terms of being out there. So I think it goes to show that Red Bull kind of struggled in their testing period. Mercedes had a lot of time on track. Kimi got some time, Russell got some time, everything was split up. This doesn't necessarily mean that the team with the least testing is going to be slow. It just gives you an understanding of how the testing time was spent. We actually saw Red Bull trying many different things with the high vis flow paint to see exactly how the aerodynamics work. And we had some teams that were just locked in, pushing out laps, like Racing Bulls had 454 laps. Yuki put in some long runs. So again, just to give you an understanding of how the testing was done for those different teams. I want to just highlight some of the interesting things that I think we can actually take away from testing. Forget all the charts and whatever the case is. I think we'll start off with the ones to beat. Now, in day 2 of testing, McLaren had some long runs, especially with Lando Norris. He did cancel a lot of laps, which means that he was pushing throughout most of the lap, and coming to the end, he kind of gave out. I think they don't want to show their hand too quick. They don't want to show how much pace is really locked into that car. So that kind of puts a lot of people on edge, trying to understand exactly how quick McLaren is. But they do seem like the ones to beat, and I do think going into this year they will start off as they finished last season. Big up Lando Norris, right? We move on to the Merc hype. Now, is Mercedes really the third fastest car? I don't think so. Now, as it stands, I think the track suited them well, the temperatures suited them well. They did have a lot of running, obviously, so they could understand their car a little bit better. But I don't expect them to really fly out with being the third fastest right behind Ferrari. I do expect them to be more within the fourth, fifth range. So ease expectations on that for a bit. And it segues into my next topic, where I want to talk about Red Bull. Now, is Red Bull really in this spiral? Are they in despair? Are they on the downtrend? No, it definitely looks like they are not as strong as they were this time last season. However, I don't think you can count out Max Verstappen, how much he could eke out of that car, how much performance he could get from a slow car. I think people are just throwing him out the picture and saying, oh no, he's not going to win a race, he's going to start off slow. I think just take it down and have understandable expectations. I do think Red Bull is slow, but not that slow that Max couldn't get maybe a first place once in a while, second or third consistently. We saw that last year, even when Perez wasn't even helping him, he was putting in the work. And even if he comes second by 20 seconds, he still gets those points, you know. So McLaren could be very much the killer car, but Red Bull just really needs to be consistent. So I think in terms of their overall team dynamic, they might be in a bit of a spiral. There's things going on behind closed doors that I think they need to get sorted, but they still have Max as it stands, which is a wild card. We don't know exactly how they're gonna be pushing forward. Now, I want to move into best of the rest. We have Williams versus Alpine. Now, I think this is going to be a midfield battle that is going to be very, very close. It depends on which car really takes the development moving into the second half of the season, because we could be close to start and then someone takes an advantage and just runs away with it. I do think that they will be trying their best to make many points. Williams looked very quick, and Alpine, I think Gasly is able to really put in the performances that could make the most out of the car. Now, I do think that because Williams has a better driver pairing, whereas Gasly and Duhan has no experience, and who knows if he's gonna stay in the car. I think that bit of a rocking ship is going to make it difficult for Alpine to keep up with Williams. Will Williams be back to their winning ways? I don't think so, but they are trending in the right direction. I do think their team principal is one of the best in Formula 1 right now, and I think give him a few years and that team will be cooking. So I move on to the bricks. This one is funny. This is really the teams that are the slowest, and I expect to be slow for the entire season. Sauber by far seems to be the slowest car overall, while they seem to be better on race pace than the Astons. I don't expect the Astons to be, chalking up the back of the pack. So I expect Sauber for the most part of this year, maybe the entire year, to be very slow. They are definitely the team that is throwing all their eggs in the 2026 basket. And moving on to Aston, they are as well, with Adrian Newey's influence really only going to be felt on the car coming next year. He only started working there last week, if I'm not mistaken. So he has no influence on this current car, and I don't think Aston is going to really spend much resources on it. So temper expectations for the Aston fans. Yes, they had a few seasons ago, they were fighting for podiums, but as of right now, they're going to be riding that struggle bus. So Alonso, I do expect to be making the most out of any car. He could drive amazing even in slow cars. Let's see what he could put together. But for the most part, those are the bricks. Now, obviously, you could tell I didn't change the colors in this episode because we're kind of talking about all the teams and the overall dynamic going into the actual race week, which I'm very excited for. Will be our first race. We get the season on the way. Now, Fantasy is not open yet. They haven't released the pricing. They haven't allowed you to make your teams yet. So I'm not gonna touch on that in detail yet. Hopefully within the next few days, I believe by early next week, things should be up and running. I will make 2 leagues. I will have a paid league for those interested. Message me, I'll add you to a group. We'll agree on the buy-ins and payouts, etc. I will also have my free league, which we'll just do for fun, and I might throw in some prizes there just to see who ends up on top in the end. Now, next week I will get into more in-depth fantasy builds and things I expect moving forward for fantasy. We'll see if they make any changes as well from last year. But for the most part, I'm very, very excited to get into the race week, the beginning of the season. Melbourne is going to be interesting. Yes, I'm wearing my Lando Norris jersey because I think he'll be cooking. So, thank you again. This was F1 Fridays. Remember to like and subscribe. I have decent views, but I don't really have much people liking the video or subscribing. So I kind of salty about that. I would appreciate it if you actually take the time to press that button. Helps me get more views, helps the series get out there. So thank you very much. See you next time.